Next, from the state capitol, we talked to several legislators to get their thoughts on what they expect from the incoming Bruce Rauner administration. This runs about 25 minutes.
Representative Ron Sandak and Senator Andy Menor, thanks for joining us on the Illinois Channel again, and hope you all had a great holiday season. Now we're going to get back into it. We're here on the 8th of January. We just ended the special session, but let's talk about what will be coming up following the inaugural of Governor-elect Rauner, and what your expectations are and how things may or may not be any different around here. Ron, if we might start with you, do you have any generalized thoughts?
Well, I choose optimism. I'm hopeful that the 99th General Assembly and the new governor are going to find some common goals to work towards, particularly with the fiscal state of our state. I think that there's some things we can accomplish in a bipartisan manner, and the good people of the state of Illinois elected divided government or shared power government. We have an executive that's a Republican with a decidedly Democratic House and Senate, which requires, in order to get things done, people to talk and work together, and I'm optimistic that's going to occur.
And Andy, what are your thoughts? It's been what, 12 years, I guess, since we had a change of government, and so now we're going to have not a Democratic governor, we're Democratic legislature. Does that make a difference?
I'm optimistic as well. I think it does make a difference, and I think, as Ron just said, the voters of the state in a very clear way chose a divided government, and that means shared responsibility in my mind, and that means that both parties are going to have to come to the table, and we're not going to get our way on any issue, but I'm hopeful that we can find compromise and common ground to solve the problems that we face in the state.
For either of you, or both of you, I should say, not only is Bruce Rauner a Republican, or going to be a Republican governor, but he's obviously never held office before. He brings an entirely different background than Governor Quinn, who spent his entire career more or less in the public sector. How do you imagine, Ron, that might make a difference?
I think there's pros and cons to that. Certainly there'll be a learning curve, and it's going to be incumbent upon people of both parties with goodwill to try and help ease some of that learning curve. And some of the advantages are maybe they don't have a background and or a taint, and I don't want to use that pejoratively, but maybe they're not touched by state government. They can come in clean at a time when, again, some really daunting issues confront us. So I see pros and cons, and I think people of goodwill, and there's plenty on both sides of the aisle, will find a way to make sure we're starting off on the right foot, we're working well together.
And Andy, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think there's different perspectives from all of us here in state government, either in the legislative branch or the executive branch. We all come from different backgrounds, different experiences, different professions, and I think in this case, what is different is the experience in government. And again, I'm hopeful that will bring a new perspective on many issues. Doesn't mean that I'm going to agree with the incoming governor on every issue, but I am hopeful, and based on the few discussions that I've had with him, that he's here to solve problems. I think that's what we have to do, and again, that's going to take compromise, and it's going to take trying to find common ground on what I think are a pretty big set of complex issues that we face.
Have either of you had an opportunity to talk to the governor-elect about your thoughts and hear some of his thoughts?
I've had a couple of opportunities, and they were very open, honest, and really informal, but nice conversations. It was a unique opportunity for me. I've never had that opportunity before. I enjoyed it. I did a lot of listening, and I was offered opportunities to make suggestions and give some analysis. I thought it was a very nice gesture, and I know the governor-elect has tried and has, I think, succeeded in reaching out to a number of legislators, and I think the intent is to start to form personal relationships, because Andy's right, and I'm not going to agree with them on everything. Just because a party alliance doesn't mean that there's full, complete alliance in interest and in policy matters. I do think, however, that type of step was an important one. I'm glad he reached out to both sides of the aisle, and I think that sets the table for the compromise and bipartisanship that's going to be required as we kind of forge ahead.
Yeah, I think it was a good move. I've had a couple of occasions to have conversations with him and his staff, and I think that was a good first step on his part. Forging relationships, having communication with the legislature, I think is the basic first positive step And I think he's done that rather well to date. And I think that is how you build upon, again, not trying to find agreement on every issue, but identifying the issues that there can be agreement and compromise on. And again, that's how I think we're going to get to solving problems in the state.
Can I ask you, we are here because of the special session, and it was whether or not we should change the way we fill a constitutional office that's been vacated, as with the death of Comptroller Topinka. Any thoughts on that you want to offer? I mean, as far as the process, irrespective of us being here and being called by Governor Quinn, do you think that this is kind of a flaw in the Constitution or not, that people just kind of really never thought about, I think, too much before?
I would think it's the latter. I don't think it's a flaw. Now, you live, you learn, and you experience, and I think there's a genuine debate and question about the best process to fill a vacancy, an untimely death of a beloved leader. And so having an election or not having an election, I think, are fair questions. And I'm happy to have those debates. I wish we weren't doing it in lame duck session. I wish it were a different context, but I think the propriety of the question is legitimate, and I don't know that there's a best answer, but the idea that we have a flawless, perfect Constitution is, it's a wonderful document, but unforeseen circumstances occur, and I think it's incumbent to look at those instances and try and do the best thing, and I think that's what's being done. Again, I just wish it were in another context.
And Eddie?
Yeah, I think Ron's right. There's a case here where I think the Constitution is almost conflicting in nature, and I don't think that was done on purpose. It's not a perfect document. It's a document that's a working document, that's a breathable document that is interpreted over time. And so far, I would say that the debate that we're having on this issue hasn't been as political as it has been made out to be in the building. There is legitimate arguments on both sides of this equation, and that's what we're working through today. And in addition to the extraordinary circumstances with Comptroller Topinka's passing, there's also a debate about merging the two offices, which is a separate issue, but it is one that has come up now today for, I don't know, many times now. It's been several years, but I'm of the opinion that we should proceed with that as well and give the people of the state the chance to say whether or not they think those two offices should be merged, and ultimately saving money for the taxpayers.
And to be clear, did you say you are for that? Or?
Yeah.
And Ron?
Yeah, I totally agree with Andy with respect to the propriety of letting people take a look at a potential merger of those offices. Andy will remember I had my short stint in the Senate. We voted on that.
That's right.
And it was unanimous. And that was a good example of bipartisan support for, I think, a lean government perspective on the state. And I think we have redundancies and we ought to demonstrate that. But in the instance we're talking about now, it is a constitutional office, both are, and it would require a change. And I think the idea of putting that to the voters is a good use of referendum. And I think I'm all in favor of putting that out there.
I guess one last thing, of course, as we look towards the future, everyone knows the Illinois budget hole and financial problems are obviously hanging over everything. What should we anticipate, do you think? I mean, do you think from here to turn this around, are we going to have to incur more pain before it gets better? Or do you have any thoughts one way or another?
I don't know how it's not going to be painful. I wish it were. I suggest even if you're on one side of the political divide or the other, there is no magic wand or silver bullet. If there had been such a solution, it would have been attained. This will require significant compromise and significant goodwill, and there will be tough votes to be taken. And Andy was right. He made a really smart, thoughtful comment from the get-go. This is shared responsibility, and that means people are going to have to step up and take votes they may not otherwise take, because it is not a short-term vote, it's a long-term vote. Explaining that to our constituencies is going to be it's incumbent upon us as leaders to do that. I think everyone's up for the challenge, but it will be a difficult time to be sure.
And I don't want to insert any partisan nature in here, but just from a practical politics, when the Democrats had both houses of the legislature and the governorship, any changes were going to be on the Democratic Party. Does it help to take the tough votes now that we have two parties with the Republican governor coming in? Does that maybe balance the blame that goes around and make it perhaps easier to take tougher votes?
I think it could. It could also work in the opposite direction theoretically, to where partisanship reigns and both sides blame each other for inaction perhaps, but I don't think that's going to happen. I think what's going to happen is, well, first of all, it's going to take some time. It took a lot of time to get in this position, and it's going to take some time to reverse that trend. But I think the idea that there's shared responsibility is something that I'm hearing from colleagues on both sides of the aisle in both chambers, and I'm hoping that come next week that's what we're going to see in action when we begin this process of trying to write the budget of the state.
All right, well, gentlemen, we appreciate you taking the time to speak with us, and we wish you both well in the session, and let's hope that we really can get Illinois back on track.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Terry.
Representative Ginny Ives, thanks for joining us again on the Illinois Channel. We're here on January the 8th. You weren't supposed to be here, but it was a special session. But let's take the opportunity. We're going to have a massive change coming this spring in the legislature with the new governor coming in. Just what are your general thoughts as we approach this spring session?
Well, I'm really optimistic for Illinois getting back on track in terms of its business climate, but also just the way that it runs business itself. And that's one of the best things about having somebody like Bruce Rauner come in as governor, is he's actually pulling in some outside influences, outside people that can look at our systems that have been looked at by set of eyes for so long, that I think that we're missing opportunities where we can really save money and do things better, just deliver Medicaid better so that people really get the services they want. And so I'm very optimistic about Illinois getting on a better track.
Have you had an opportunity to meet with the governor-elect at any point?
Yes, I had. I did. I had a private meeting with Mr. Rauner. He brought me into his Chicago offices, and we had a very nice discussion. He was listening the entire time about what my thoughts, and so I'm very encouraged by that too, to be able to go to somebody and talk to him about, hey, had you looked at this? Here's an issue. How about that? It was a very refreshing conversation to have, that kind of access.
And one last question, because you haven't been in the legislature really all that long. How many years is it now?
I've been in 2 years, and I will be starting my second term here shortly.
And as a relatively new member, what again were some of the things that surprised you about how the Capitol ran over the last 2 years that maybe you hadn't anticipated?
Well, that's a loaded question. I could go in any direction on this one. I think what surprised me the most is that I feel, and this may be hard for others to say, but and it's hard for me to say, but the truth is that I think that there's not enough scrutiny on what the legislation that we're passing actually does, and how, when it's implemented, how does it really affect people. I don't think there's enough time taken to really look into the details deeply about what we're passing and how it affects people, and I have a problem with that. So. All
right, well, Representative Ginny Ives, we appreciate you joining us, and we'll look forward to talking with you again.
All right, thank you, Terry.
Representative Ann Williams, thanks for joining us again on the Illinois Channel. And just give us, if you would, what are your thoughts as we go into the beginning of a new legislative session, and we'll have a new governor, the first change in party in the governor's mansion in 12 years?
The beginning of a new session always offers a lot of interesting opportunities as well as challenges. I think how Governor-elect Rauner is going to govern is a question mark at this point, and I look forward to working with him in a bipartisan fashion to solve some of the big issues that we have to face. However, at this point, I think it's going to be very interesting to see what his suggestions are in terms of some of our fiscal issues. And so it's a bit of a wild card at this point.
Everyone knows, obviously, the state budget is something that desperately needs to be addressed. And now we don't have the tax revenues that we had with the tax increase of 2011. Is that an issue that in your mind is that you think we will have to readdress as far as bringing in more revenues so that the state doesn't run up even more debt?
Well, the gap that's created from the elimination of that percentage of the income tax is very, very significant. And without some other way to bring in those funds, I think we're going to find the cuts to be really unsustainable. It's easy to say government is spending like crazy, but I know, just having been here for a few terms, that we have made the easy cuts. What's left are the kind of deep cuts to critical human services, to education funding, to paying down our debt that we really just can't sustain in a responsible way. So we need to find a way to get through the problem without, relying on big generalizations like no more taxes, no more revenues. We have to look and see where we can find that balance, and that's a big challenge, and I look forward to hearing what the governor proposes.
He will have his budget address, which is coming up in February, so we'll find out what he's going to do. But in just looking the other day, we were talking with COGFA, the Commission on Government Forecasting and Accountability, that runs the numbers for the legislature. And just for the viewer standpoint, it's 95% of the state's operating budget goes to education, human services, and government services, when you include the pensions in there. So 43% of the budget goes to education alone. And yet, right now, we're only paying 89% of what we had promised the K through 12 people on a per student basis, 89% of the $6,019 a year per pupil. Within the Democratic caucus, or let me just open it up, within the House, when you talk to your colleagues, is there any kind of either consensus on where cuts in spending should be made, or conversely, is there any consensus, do you hear, on how we might boost revenues?
Well, I think everyone that has taken a look at even the basic budget numbers will agree we can't cut our way out of the fiscal situation the state is in. That being said, we can't tax our way out of it, and those may sound like cliches, but I think the reality is we do have to strike a balance. Again, I think we've made a lot of the tough cuts. We are still not funding education at the level we need to. Our critical human service funding, the kind of funds that we need for people to have even the basic quality of life and health care from the state, it is not being met adequately. And, you know, there's some places that we can't cut. We have to make the pension payment, we have Medicaid responsibilities. Those are huge percentages of the state government that we can't touch. Another interesting fact, and I don't have the figures with me right now, but Illinois per capita has one of the fewest numbers of state employees based on our population. So people think, oh, cut government, it's so expansive, there's a lot of waste. When it comes down to it, we've done a lot of the elimination of the wasteful programs and the easy cuts. So what we're looking at now is really achieving that balance in a responsible way.
All right, and if you had to guess right now, how long would you imagine if we turn this fiscal house around? Can it be done in how many years, would you guess?
Gosh, I have no idea really how to answer that question. I will say there are some factors that have contributed to the fiscal challenges that we face, that many states have faced with regard to the economic downturn, which was significant and more prolonged than most people anticipated. So it's not just something that we can turn around on a dime. I think that it will be an ongoing challenge, and it's going to mean different practices moving forward. We're going to just have to approach government in a different way. I think we've all learned we don't postpone making big, important payments like pensions, because those, you know, the amount owed when we do postpone things like that just dramatically increases and then puts us in a place we can't sustain. One of my Republican colleagues has used this phrase, which I've borrowed. He says we're still in a hole. There's no doubt about that, but we've stopped digging. So it's just a matter of working our way out. But we have made progress in the last couple of years. Since I've been in, we still have a long way to go.
And as you noted, the whole national economy tends to either lift the states or pull them down, and then depending upon how each state is structured financially is either going to create a massive problem for it, or maybe they can weather the storm. Let's hope the national economy, I should say, helps to lift Illinois as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all pretty much agree about the problem. The numbers are there. We have a sense of the extent of the problem. How we get to a solution is where the disagreement comes in, and what we'll be spending the next several months working on.
Representative, thank you again.
Thank you so much.
Senator Dale Rauner, thanks for joining us again on the Illinois Channel. You know, as we head into the spring session with a new governor, what are your thoughts on how this may or may not be any different than what we've had over the last 6 years under Governor Quinn?
I'm hopeful. We have now some balance here in state government with a Republican governor and a General Assembly that is still dominated by the Democrat Party. I think it's a real opportunity for us to address in a meaningful way some of the state's biggest challenges. An economy that continues to lag, a fiscal situation that every year takes us closer to the textbook definition of insolvency, and other issues out there as well. I think that this governor's biggest challenge is to not convince the voters that these issues need to be addressed, because he's already done that. He won the election. But is to convince the Democrat leadership that we need to take a different path in this state, that if they want to put meaning to their words, that they want to see prosperity across the state for people of all income levels, then we need to do things that free up the private sector, that will allow our economy to grow, and at the same time, here in Springfield, get the unsustainable rate of spending growth that's been going on here in Springfield for a decade under control.
You know, one of the big areas of government spending is Medicaid, and the expansion of Medicaid, as Governor Quinn had wanted to do that and has started. You and Representative Patty Bellock not too long ago, well, 2 or 3 years ago, were very instrumental in what was called the SMART Act, and was supposed to save the state, as I recall, about $1.5 billion a year. But then you also complained that under Governor Quinn, many of those changes, those reforms that were going to save money, weren't being implemented.
That's right.
Can a Governor Rauner revisit that, and what changes could he make that might be part of the solution in cutting state spending?
He absolutely can revisit those issues once he becomes governor. And I know many others will urge him to do so, and where he should start, in my opinion, should be with implementing the reforms that the General Assembly passed in the SMART Act. Many of those were set aside by Governor Quinn, while Governor Quinn celebrated the passage of the SMART Act and said we've done what we need to do to save Medicaid. He didn't follow through and actually implement those changes to make the program solvent so that it helps the people who really need the help and isn't out there assisting people who don't belong on the Medicaid program in the first place. And I think that should be our first step here in Springfield with the new governor, and that is to ensure the credibility of the program. More and more people become disenchanted with programs of public assistance because they have a lack of faith that public officials are safeguarding those policies and making sure that the only people availing themselves of taxpayer services are the people who really need it. And that is a signature problem here in Springfield, and I think Governor Rauner, working with the General Assembly as a whole, can really make strides in dealing with that issue.
You know, 2 points. One, to remind our viewers, there was initially a contract given out to a firm that went over some of the Medicaid rolls just to determine how many people were receiving benefits that should not have been. And while it was a limited poll, I think 20,000 people, if I recall, were in that sampling. There was some incredibly high number that they found. You can remind us of it. But part and parcel of what I'd like to know is, have you had a chance to talk to, at this point, the governor-elect and discuss any of these issues?
I have had a brief conversation with the governor-elect. I've had more prolonged conversations with some of his aides. The number you're searching for is 40% of the cases that we were able to go through with this double verification system, which was badly needed. We found that 4 out of 10 people on Medicaid weren't eligible for the program. Now, if that process would have been allowed to continue, even if that percentage would have dropped, even if that percentage would have been halved, that still would have meant that 1 in every 5 people on Medicaid didn't belong in the program, which would amount to a multi-billion-dollar savings over a period of just a very few short years for both people paying taxes to state government and to the United States government. So again, that's an issue we need to revisit, and revisit soon.
I'll throw out kind of as a follow-up, about 10 years ago or so, there was one hospital, I won't name them, in the Chicagoland area that had so many people being treated under Medicaid from out of state that they lost $50 million. That's one hospital. So it gives some inkling of the amount of dollars we're talking to.
You bet.
That aside, how will having a Republican governor, does that give any greater strength to the Republican minorities in the legislature, in the House and Senate, because you have a political ally in the governor's mansion?
Clearly it does, both in terms of the practical numbers, because even though the Democrats still have majorities in both chambers, the Republicans working together and then peeling off just a handful of Democrats can make a working majority for the new governor. But I think mostly the election of a Republican governor means that the ideas that we've put forward on reforming Medicaid, on reforming the budget process, on reforming our economic policies with regards to unemployment insurance or workers' compensation. Now, those ideas are now on the second floor, and they are much more likely to get a serious hearing than they were before Bruce Rauner was elected.
Last question. Governor Rauner has never held public office. Do you think that's something that should be of concern, or is that something that's a strength?
I think it's a strength. It's a strength. I think that someone coming in to the governor's office who looks at this model of state government, which is antiquated and wasteful in so many ways, and says, why are we doing it this way? Let's build it in a way that is to use a private sector term, compete. That's a great perspective, and we need it badly here in Springfield.
All right, Senator Rauner, thank you.
You bet, Terry. Thank you.